What's going on, guys? It's Crimson from Simple Studio, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make the bass line from Meduza's track Everything You Have Done. Now, this track is on the Beatport charts for ages, and it is such a phenomenal track that you'll see it all over TikTok and in all these festivals that are happening right now. So one cool thing about this bass line is that it has this glidey element to it, but it also has this grittiness to it that's adding so much energy and drive. But it also flips back and forth between being a sustained bass line, which seems like there's only one note playing with a little bit of sidechain, back to 16th notes playing over time. So I had to really think about how I'm going to approach this bass line, and one of the realizations that I had is that using an arpeggiator allows me to switch between the two really easily. So let me show you what it sounds like with the gate being modulated. The rate is obviously 1/16 because we want to be able to hear the 16th notes. So this is what it sounds like when the gate is low and then higher. The way I started off is I created two layers. The first layer of SERUM has this waveform called SH Moog Saw Bass. You can get this waveform from synthhacker.com, which is a great preset company. And the reason I chose this specific waveform is because I wanted to emulate the Moog Sub 37 or Moog analog synthesizers, which kind of allow you to feel that like analog gritty bass. And that's what a lot of tech house artists use and have in their studios. So I have this in an octave lower, and then I have the sub, that's another 2 octaves lower. And both of these oscillators are going to the filter, and the filter is the MG Low 24, and the filter is being modulated by this envelope, envelope 2, with a relatively low decay and a 0 sustain and a relatively low attack as well. The next thing I have is this voicing is mono on this one because this is more going to be the sub layer for this bass. I have the other layer which is slightly wide, and on top of this I have the portamento set to always so that you can hear that little bit of glide. Finally, I have the effects where I add distortion, and in this distortion I'm using the X Shaper, and the X Shaper is a really nice quality of distortion, so that's why I used it. So now without the X Shaper, what it sounds like. With the X Shaper, it has a subtle effect to it. Okay, so now this is the lower layer essentially, and then what we do next is we make sure that there's a bass mono added to it to ensure that there's nothing finicky going on in the low end under 120 hertz. After this, we also create a wide layer. So I essentially duplicate the SERUM preset. I actually duplicate the entire channel and create an instrument rack. And then I choose the oscillator B. I again bring it down to -1 octave, but I now increase the unison to 4 because now this is going to be wide, and I add a little bit of detuning. So there is going to be more width to it, and I increase the blend to so. Then you can turn off the mono, and then we can add width later on, right? And yeah, essentially everything else is the same. The envelopes are essentially the same. Nothing else to be done here. Next, we use this plugin called Wider to just widen up the high end of the bass. And to ensure that it doesn't affect the low end, I am doing a low cut on it at around 200 hertz. So now with the low bass line, this is what it sounds like. Now adjust the whiteness to taste. I like to keep it very lean. Yeah, that's good enough. The next thing I do is I've noticed that this bass line is very gritty, so I wanted to add a bunch of saturation to it. So I went a little hard using the Decapitator Saturn drum bus, and then final some such side chaining and EQing. So let me go through the Decapitator settings. First things first, I love the drum fattener preset, drum fattener 1 preset, because it's really good for leads, basses, the top ends of basses especially, and in general, a lot of tech housey instruments could use the quality of this saturation. So the way I approach finding out what's the right setting for any saturator is first I turn the mix up to 100%, and then I mess with the drives and I listen to the sound. So at that point of time, it sounds too distorted and you can't even hear things very clearly. So I bring it down to between 3 and 4 because I like that, and then I turn the mix down further, almost to the point that I can't hear it anymore. And that's how I like to do distortion and saturation, to the point that it's super subtle. Next we have the Saturn. It's the default setting. I have the warm tube on the higher band above 100 Hertz. Anything below 100 Hertz, I have it turned off, so nothing's affecting the lower frequencies. And the same thing can be said in this Decapitator. You notice that the low cut is making sure that the low frequencies are not affected. All right, and then within this, I'm making sure there is the drive set to 59%, which is something that I've landed on after doing the same test that I do with any type of saturation, that is. That sounds about good. Now, you must be asking the question like, how do I know what sounds good, especially if you don't have a trained ear? I just try to compare it to the sound of Meduza's bassline by listening to that song consistently, and that's how I landed to this level. But in general, you want to train your ears to make sure that you can identify what is harsh and what is not. And one way to do it is by, putting these types of saturations on different instruments and seeing how far you can push the drive with the full 100% mix, and then, toning it down. And over time, you will develop an ear and you will figure out more nuances between this effect and dry signal. Next, I add the drum bus, which I'm toggling the transients and trying to reduce the transients a slight amount just to make it a little bit more smooth versus this. Next thing, I add a kickstart. This is to create the groove, which is the iconic part about this bass line. Without the kickstart, it just doesn't sound as creative. Listen to it with the drums. It's kind of conflicting with the kick, and it just doesn't give the groove. But with the aggressive sidechain, so I have this third option selected and mix at 100%. It sounds really groovy this way. Next thing, I EQ a little bit. What I'm trying to do is boost a little bit of the lows and try to finally match the bass line to be sounding closer to what Meduza has been doing in there. You would think this is the end, but I finally also send this room reverb return channel where I'm sending it to an H reverb, which is a Waves plugin, and I'm setting it to a really small room and a really small size and really small decay time and a little bit of balance between early reflections and tail, full dry wet signal, as it is with any return channels. Next thing, I'm making sure it does not conflict with any of the lows. Neither does it conflict with the highs above 5K, because the hats are very prominent around 5K and you don't want to compete with them. And this is what it sounds like. I'm also sending the drums to them so they all sound a little cohesive, but let me turn off the drums and you can hear the bass alone. It's very subtle, and that's kind of how I like it. And now you have. And that's it. That's how you make a Meduza style bass line. Now, if you like this tutorial, please like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon and let us know what you would like to see in the future in our tutorials. Feel free to also join our Discord group where we have discussions of sound design, music production, and how to get signed to music labels, because that is the end goal, isn't it? Getting signed to a label gets you closer to your dream of touring the world and playing festivals that you love. I will also put a download link to this preset in the description below, and you can subscribe to our Patreon to download all of the presets that we show in our tutorials. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great day and enjoy the music making.